All right, so we're diving into the study phase. This is, again, very similar to the plan phase and the do phase, in that this is the part of your dissertation, your chapter 4, where you're talking about, this stage of your PDSA cycle. So overall purpose is to provide your readers, your audience, with an account of how you analyzed your implementation data and present your key findings. So you're kind of doing two things. You're telling your audience, again, number one, how did you analyze the data? Like, what approach did you use? I'll use the term methods, like what analytical methods did you use, like thematic analysis, or you're just engaging in descriptive statistics, right? So the how you analyze data. And then two, what were your findings? Like, what were your outputs from that analysis? Demonstrates your ability to study your own practice systematically and serves as the foundation for informed decision-making in the ACT phase. So again, we're trying to keep all four of these different phases of your PDSA cycle a little bit separate of each other. They all are here in chapter 4, but we're trying to be really careful that we don't just start writing and start talking about everything all at once. Like, they each go in their own sections. This section will probably be about 4 to 8 pages, 4 to 8 pages, including your data displays, figures, and reflections. Slight possibility it might be slightly more than that, just based on how many displays or figures you have. So check in with your chair if you need it, but that's about the amount that we want to see for like wanting to know your findings. And I will say before I move on, this is also this is a really important section for your stakeholders in particular. Like, you did this PDSA cycle, you made this implementation, you made this change. People, stakeholders, investors are most often interested of and how did it go? What were your findings? They're going to want to skip to this study phase section. So overview, you'll describe your data analysis approach, present your findings with appropriate data displays and figures, so using visuals to show your findings, and reflect on the meaning and implications of what you discovered about your change idea and your theory of improvement. So you are a human instrument in the study. You will both share the findings from your analyses. Some of those analyses, you're making decisions as to how you choose to analyze your data. You're sharing those decision-making strategies with your audience, and you're also reflecting on what this means and some of its implications. So that's where this human aspect, even our own subjectivities and your own expertise in your area, that's making sense of the findings. It is one thing to say that the mean was 7.2. It is a whole nother level to tell me what 7.2 actually means, in relation to your study or in relation to that statistic. See what I'm saying? It's not just doing calculations. It's doing calculations, the analysis, and then making interpretations. What does this mean? Is this good or bad? Is this a change or not a change? Is it a big change? Is it a little change? Is it no change? So, tone and approach. Use past tense. Use both descriptive and an analytical tone to your commentary. So that's kind of the what might be helpful to note here is this idea of what, and then so what, right? What is it? And then why is that even important, right? Again, this idea of here's some statistics, here's some numbers, or here's a theme, but also what does that mean, right? So you're being both descriptive, describing, and then bumping up into your thinking abilities, rethinking Bloom's taxonomy, and then having this analytical tone where you're making some interpretations. Write with analytical clarity while remaining accessible. That's just don't get too academese, keep it so that your audience, think of your audience here. You want your audience to be able to read this section and make sense of it. Maintain first-person narrative. Focus on presenting findings objectively before interpreting their meaning. This is really important, and you can even think of this as we're trying to build an argument. We're trying to get our audience to understand the importance of our findings. It's really helpful we'll get into this later, into some of the tips of showing and telling of here's some of the findings, presenting those first, and then here's what these findings mean. If you go backwards, if you just start sharing what your findings mean, but you don't give your audience your actual findings, they're going to be really confused, and it's going to cause some confusion and serve your presentation. Narrative strategy and organization. Do use level 3 headings to organize here. So you might even have certain outlines that you might follow or an outline that you create, but you're basically writing a systematic account of how you analyze your implementation data, presenting key findings. This should read as a clear, objective presentation of your analytical approach and discoveries, demonstrating how you made sense of your data to inform future decisions. Now, I know this has a term like objective, like we are being like objective in the ways in which we're presenting things, but we are also incorporating our interpretations, but it's not that our interpretations are biased or our interpretations are super, super subjective, but we have these really informed interpretations of how we talk about our data and our findings. Key aspects to address. The very first thing you should start with is your data analysis approach and your analytical methods used. Be descriptive and, if appropriate, give examples to help your reader understand. So if you're engaging in a lot of empathy interviews and you tried to analyze for themes, you engaged in thematic analysis, then you need to say, like, I engaged in thematic analysis. If you're using some sort of resource to guide your thematic analysis approach, which I strongly suggest, you cite that source, you cite those experts in thematic analysis, and you give your readers your steps. First, I did this, and then I did that. So I transcribed my data, and then I coded my data, did some rounds of open coding, and then I actually did another round of coding before I then categorized my codes, then I named my categories, and then I determined what my themes were. Like, what were the steps that you went through? So that's kind of describing your analytical methods. Key findings presentation with relevant tables, figures, or charts. So we want to have a lot of visuals here. Particularly if you are engaging in survey data, there are different ways that you can visually display some of that survey data. Even if you're engaging in text-based data, like interviews or focus groups, there's still ways that you can visually display those. You can think about displaying your code book or your sample codes with sample segments of codes. There are visual tree diagrams that you can have that describe maybe some of the different categories and how these categories of codes related to each other. There's so many ways in which you can visually show your findings and what your findings might even mean. Do make sure that you label tables and figures using APA 7 guidelines. You want to discuss any patterns and variations and how different people or situations responded. So again, be careful that you're not just engaging in this like strong objective, I'm just here to analyze data. Like, this is still usually participatory and it's still collaborative, and you're still making these different, you're understanding the nuance of how certain people might respond in certain ways versus others, especially if you're engaging in a PDSA cycle or an implementation where you're working with different participants, or you're working with different stakeholders. How your findings compare to your original predictions and expectations. So those are some other things that you can address, as well as evidence you found about the key drivers you thought would make change successful. So yeah, I'll just kind of stop there. Some cautions. There's, maybe before I get into cautions, in this section, this is where different, very similar to your do phase section, where you and your classmates or colleagues might have different outlines for your do phase. Very similarly, you're going to have different outlines for your study phase, because you might have used different data collection methods or had different components of different phases or stages of your do phase that have certain findings or certain analytical checkpoints or benchmarks that you want to talk through. So really be mindful that in addressing all of these things in your study phase, that you're also doing this in a very organized way, in a very logical way. And you can even use and think about your do phase and the narrative outline of your do phase, and kind of try to tell the narrative story of your analysis too, in a way that makes sense, or in a way that's very complementary to your do phase. There's one other thing that came to mind. Oh, you can also make sure, and you might want to take note of this because it's not necessarily on the screen, but you're keeping your inquiry questions at heart, right? Like the sense of you're guiding inquiry questions for your study. You might have had 2 or 3. You want to make sure that in your study phase, you're kind of answering those questions in some form or fashion. And so pulling that into your narrative, or even maybe that's also evidenced by certain headings that you use, but you're very clear in that if you're going in with these guiding questions that you're kind of coming out with responses and answers to those guiding questions. Okay, now for some cautions. Avoid just copying and pasting quotes and data outputs without any description or analytical commentary to support them. And if I can say it again on repeat, if it wasn't a video, I would, because this is the tendency of like thinking that, okay, here's my output, here's my data, I'm just going to put it in. That's not, that doesn't necessarily mean, that is not the same thing, I should say, as analysis and interpretation. So avoid copying and pasting quotes, plugging them in. Avoid copying and pasting visual displays and just putting them in if they don't have any description or analytical commentary to support them. You're imagining that your dissertation here in chapter 4, you're almost presenting this narrative presentation of your findings. So if you were to present these findings to your audience, we don't just put a figure up on the slide and don't say anything. Well, I hope you don't, right? You need to talk through those. So when you have a visual, when you have a display, when you're sharing a finding, you need to tell your audience what does this mean? First, what is it? How did you get there? And then what does this actually mean? So what? Why is this important? Pull in some of your expertise and your insights and your analytical thinking there. Still stay open. Doesn't mean that your interpretation of your finding is the one and only and sole truth to that interpretation, but you're presenting it as a very valid one because of who you are and the expertise that you have. Don't force your readers to analyze your data to figure out your findings. Select quotes wisely, pulling in those that most strongly support your analysis. The biggest thing I sometimes see students do, especially when they're working with qualitative data, is they want to copy and paste these big block quotes or copy and paste chunks of the transcript where to them it might be very obvious as to what's meaningful from that block quote. But to a reader, and especially to me, when I wasn't part of your study, two, I don't know your context like you do. I read that as a block quote paragraph and I'm just like, okay, I don't know what this is talking about. So you have to hold your reader's hand and point out to them specifically, what is it in here? So you might have this dialogue of maybe you had a group interview and you've got people dialoguing and you've got, their name and some it's just their dialogue, right? But then you follow that with your analytical commentary of what just happened there? And what do I, as the reader, need to notice that's really important about that interchange or that exchange of dialogue and information? So do not assume that your reader is you. You want to over explain things. Trust me, the more you can think about okay, I'm just going to belabor this a little bit. Myself or your chair would probably rather tell you pull back a little bit than you need to give more. So, okay. Do not just copy and paste. It needs to have description and needs to have analytical commentary. I want to hear your take on it as the analysis expert, which is what you are as a researcher. Okay. Balance showing and telling. If you just tell us about your findings, we might not be convinced. Also show us your findings using visuals and quotes. Think of this as building your argument for your findings. You can think of this as analogy might be in a courtroom. We're showing evidence and then we're kind of also telling about it. If all I did was tell you what my finding was without giving you any evidence that that's actually my finding, you shouldn't believe me. Your audience, your stakeholders are going to need a little bit more. And so try to do this balance of showing and telling. This first caution is just showing, but you're not telling. So that's like going into the courtroom and be like, here's evidence, but you're not giving any story or any connection, any commentary about what this actually means and what it's connected to. So try to do this nice job of balancing showing and telling. If you had to choose, I would maybe tease in a little bit of telling, do a lot of showing, and then do a lot of telling. So it's here's my theme. I'll tell you what my finding is, or here's my findings title with a brief little overview, but then here's evidence and evidence and evidence, and then analytical interpretation and commentary about what all this stuff means and why that's important. Avoid overly long block quotes that belabors the reader. They're the worst. Focus on capturing the most important information. You can use ellipses to signal omitted content. So if I have 3 paragraphs of text and there's important pieces on it, but there's kind of like, it's not like there's fluff in between, but there's parts of that really big block quote from that participant that would actually be distracting or unnecessary. It's these other things I want to highlight that I can use ellipses. I can omit the fluff, the stuff that's just going to be distracting, and insert ellipses to signal omitted content. So it's kind of like whenever I see ellipses and quotes, it means that I selectively took out information and just gave you the good stuff, right? Always follow block quotes with analytical commentary. Tell your readers why your participants' voices, experiences are important. Tell us your interpretation and what the quote means. And as much of these is also giving you a lot of cautions about quotes and some maybe aspects of qualitative data, this also works for survey data, especially surveys that tend to be more qualitative in nature. Like, tell us again, like, here's some of your findings, show us what they are, show us some of your descriptive statistics for some of those things, and then tell us what it means. Here, you should be telling us, was this a change or not? Was it a big change? Was it a meaningful change? Was it not? And that some of those might be like really subjective understandings or interpretations. Like, did it change by 2/10? Did it change by 3 whole units? Was that big enough? Was that, I don't know, was it meaningful, right? So your whole goal in this section is to not only share your findings, but also what is its meaning and is it meaningful? I'm repeating this just, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but I recognize, like, no, this is the phase that you're in. And often when I've worked with students, sometimes they get lost and they just do a lot of showing and they don't do any telling, or opposite, they do a whole bunch of telling but no showing. And so either way, I'm not trusting. I don't understand what's going on. So you have to have a nice little balance. You will conclude this section just like you've concluded other sections of your phases with reflections. Answer each of the following reflection questions. So this is really important. Analysis, and we'll even talk about ethical considerations of analysis. So much can happen just in the analysis and interpretation. Okay, so these are reflection questions we want you to answer. Organize your paragraphs and write clear main topics. So you might have 1 paragraph for each. Okay. What do your findings teach you about your theory of improvement and how change works in your context? What surprises or unexpected findings emerged? Not like, you might have had surprises in the do phase about how things were implemented, but here it's about findings. What surprises or unexpected findings emerged, and what do they reveal about your problem or practice? How do your findings connect to existing research or improvement science principles? So you can have a brief little discussion about some of the things that you found. Did they, you might even have elements of this in your chapter 2, your contextualizing of the problem of practice. Did some of your findings come alongside what you've written about or what you've read about in the past? Or did they not? Were they really different? And it's not that one is right or wrong. Sometimes we want things to, like, this is a sense of like confirming and confirmability, or it disconfirms something. And there's value and meaning in both of those. But again, we just want to talk about it and be really transparent about it. And then this final reflection question: what questions remain unanswered, and what limitations should inform how you interpret your findings? What questions remain unanswered? It is so likely in these cycles that you won't have everything fully answered. And you might even make certain decisions taking into your act phase of like how we might need to do things differently so that some of these things actually can be answered. So this is a really good reflective question that helps you be really critical to yourself, like this critical self-reflection, and taking a look of like, I've answered some of this, but maybe not all of this. And so what does that mean? Detail level provides specific evidence for your findings while protecting participant confidentiality. Include enough analytical detail that readers can understand your reasoning and evaluate conclusions. Present findings objectively before interpreting their meaning in the reflection subsection. Some writing tips. When using level 3 headings, make sure there's always writing in between level 2 and 3. So remember, the study phase is a level 2 heading. And then you're probably organizing your findings, your analyses and findings by level 3 headings. So make sure that there's at least like a small it could be multiple paragraphs, but at least one paragraph between your level 2 and your level 3 headings. Present findings clearly and objectively, use data displays to strategically illustrate, be honest about ambiguous findings or limitations in your data, separate descriptions of findings, main narrative from interpretation, analytical commentary. Connect findings to your measurement plan and original predictions. Use participant quotes and examples to judiciously illustrate key points. And remember that credible analysis provides the foundation for informed action in the next phase. So those are some commentary and some coaching on your study phase. Good luck. This is also a big section, but I know that we're breaking it up over time. You've been and out analyzing your data for several weeks and are analyzing as you go. You've also taken some time to work on your visuals and your visuals and or your figures, and you're putting it all together here in this section.